In this short presentation, I'll briefly introduce what trauma is, how to manage it, how it affects us, and what you can do to help your students. We're all suffering high levels of stress and trauma right now, and to take care of yourselves, to be better able to care for your students, is part of what I hope you'll be thinking about as I'm talking about really supporting your students. And it's important to take care of yourself, just as in the airplane safety protocols, they tell you to put your oxygen mask on before putting on your child's. Stress and trauma have a direct impact on our own work as well as our students' learning. Trauma is any negative life event or series of events that occurs to us in a position of relative helplessness. We don't have control. It's why it's so important to control what you can, because so much is out of your control, and that creates a feeling of helplessness and that things are being done to you. Our students are feeling the same way. An alternative definition of trauma is any situation that is too much or too fast for the brain to handle. Stress releases powerful hormones of cortisol and adrenaline. Trauma, like we've been experiencing during COVID time, is stress quadrupled. When we're stressed, we go out of our window of tolerance and either shut down, which is hypoarousal, or freak out, which is hyperarousal. In the next slides, I'm going to explain what's going on in our brains that causes this to happen, but I wanted to start here with where we want us and our students to get to, back in our window of tolerance. The window of tolerance is where we feel grounded and emotionally balanced. When you're within your window of tolerance, you're able to think rationally and make decisions without feeling overwhelmed. Most people are naturally able to self-regulate to stay in this zone, but stress, anxiety, and fear quickly move us out of it. Meditation, deep breathing, listening to music, and exercise are all ways of bringing us back into our window of tolerance. But if we're stressed and anxious, we need to try to consciously deploy these methods. Students need to be in their window of tolerance to learn, because here's what's going on in their brains. The brain consists of three parts: the reptilian or lizard brain, which is the deepest and earliest to develop. It's responsible for all things that newborn babies can do, like breathing, eating, and to quote the psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk, pooping and peeing. Above that is the limbic system, which begins developing at birth and is sometimes called the mammalian brain because all animals that live in groups and nurture their young possess one. Above that is the neocortex, sometimes called the human brain. It's the sense-making brain that begins really developing around 2 years of age. Trauma triggers the reptilian brain that includes a structure called the amygdala. This is the fight, flight, freeze part of the brain. When the amygdala senses danger, for instance, when we're stressed and experiencing trauma, it triggers the release of the stress hormones cortisol and adrenaline. The hippocampus plays a major role in consolidating memories and sending them to the cerebral cortex, where information gets put together. Because the hippocampus contains a large density of cortisol receptors, if there's too much of the stress hormone cortisol, it can become overwhelmed and unable to do its job. This is why people experiencing trauma and stress can actually suffer short-term memory loss and have difficulty with long-term memory retrieval. Lastly, the frontal lobes, which are unique to humans, enable us to use language and abstract thought and allow us to plan, reflect, and imagine. The last part of the brain to fully develop is the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the center for emotional and self-regulation and executive function. The prefrontal cortex enables us to plan, focus attention, remember information, and juggle multiple projects. It's the conscious decision-making part of the brain. When cortisol and adrenaline are flooding the system, like the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex becomes overwhelmed and can't do what it's supposed to do. We literally can't think. Worse, the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until our mid-20s. So our younger students are particularly challenged to self-regulate and make decisions. So that was a very, very quick introduction to why we're all having trouble right now with memory, focus, and decision-making. Knowing that it's because of our neurochemistry can actually help reduce stress. It's physiological. So now that you know, what can you do about it? Faculty should encourage students to engage in self-regulation practices like meditation, walking around, aromatherapy, or my current favorite, finger squeezes. Try it. Squeeze each finger from the base up, slowly and firmly, first on one hand, then the other. And all of these practices help get you back into your window of tolerance, which is where you need to be to think, focus, learn, remember. A trauma-informed approach to teaching requires attention, caring awareness, and sensitivity. That said, the principles that I'm going to outline here are actually principles of good teaching. They deepen student learning because they deepen student engagement. Safety and well-being can even mean ensuring that everyone knows where the restrooms are, that everyone has adequate personal space, especially now with concerns about transmission and the virus. Problem solving for classroom variables like lighting, temperature, extraneous or distracting noise. Encouraging students to take care of themselves during class time by standing up, drinking water, or stretching. Providing advance notice when material could be emotionally or psychologically challenging. And a little bit of predictability and consistency can go a long way during times of uncertainty, even being consistently flexible and understanding. Trustworthiness and transparency can be fostered by adopting community agreements that you develop with the class as a whole and agree to. Transparency means explaining your decision-making in why you chose certain activities or assignments over others and what you hope students will learn from them. Bonding with community is a healthy way to cope with, respond to, and heal from trauma. Social supports and relationships can be protective factors against traumatic stress. While we were entirely online learning, we heard from many faculty that students were saying that their courses were their social network and that they looked forward to connecting. Using class warm-ups helps students get to know each other informally, and group work ensures continued contact and interaction. Create a culture of doing with rather than to or for. Again, create community agreements and revisit them and revise them throughout the course. Provide instructional materials in different formats to support different students' learning needs. Create opportunities for shared leadership with students, such as student-led presentations or lectures, student facilitation, and allow students input on what readings, exercises, or activities they'll do and how they'll be evaluated. Because so much is happening to them, giving students agency addresses the effects of stress and trauma. They have some control. Invite their feedback and tell them how you use it. Remind students that a pass or can you come back to me is an option, for example, during icebreakers, response requests, or classroom discussions. And ensure your class content reflects diverse voices and experiences, and that all of those are valued. Self-educate and get to know your own internal biases, because we all have them. Try to actively recognize and address historical traumas, remembering that equality and equity are not the same thing. Equality means giving everyone the same thing. Equity means giving everyone what they need to achieve similar ends. Knowing that our neurochemistry is literally impeding memory and decision-making can reduce stress, and adopting trauma-informed practices can both support students in a caring and attentive way and improve and deepen learning for all our students. This is my last slide. We borrowed this image from a presentation by the neuroscientist Mays Imad, who uses it frequently in presentations on trauma-informed teaching. One practice of inclusive teaching is to describe images. It's actually a valuable practice that may help you and your students see things differently or more clearly. So, this is an image of green hills with a path running between them. The path is made of paving stones. Some of them read hope. On the path are students in graduation robes, and they're walking toward the sun in hope. Thank you for listening.